The police chief is announcing the formation of a new community task force. Let's listen in.
I just want to say thank you for being here. And we're really focused on talking about solutions to the uptick in violence. And I've been working with Mayor Harrell and to ensure that we make this city safe. And like everyone in our city, I'm deeply concerned about the recent increase in gun violence. That includes the tragic death of a pregnant woman on the streets of downtown in the middle of the day. And it's unacceptable that people live and work here fear for their safety. And it's unacceptable that innocent lives are lost due to senseless acts of violence. This morning I was at the scene of 137th and Aurora regarding the homicide. I want to thank Chief Scoggins for being here because I know his department is feeling that uptick in violence. And that's why I'm today announcing the formation of a new community violence task force. I want the people of Seattle to know we're committed to taking action. I'm marshaling the efforts of every bureau across the department to include our regional and federal partners, because violence isn't just in Seattle, but events outside of Seattle can and do affect us. And this task force will stem the tide of gun violence, which we only know increases over the summer months. The task force will be comprised of officers and detectives throughout the department. Specialty units will be rerouted to focus on 4 specific areas of the city: Aurora, Central District, South End, and downtown. And together we'll work to identify the people harming our community. And I want to thank our federal partners, as I've been in communication to ensure we get those additional resources that will make a difference. We are increasing our presence in areas where violence is widespread. And I want to make it very clear, this senseless violence and loss of lives will not be tolerated. If you are trafficking women, if you are selling drugs, and if you're committing crimes with a gun, the Seattle Police Department is coming for you. We will arrest you and we will hold you accountable. I want to thank the King County Prosecutor's Office and the City Attorney's Office for their support as we make our city safer. I'll open it up for questions.
So talk about this. Sorry, you go ahead.
How big is this task force?
Right.
You said 4 different, so is it precinct-based?
No, it is going to be a citywide base. I'm going to have one of our assistant chiefs will be leading this task force. Chief Barden is right behind me. Will be leading this task force. He's run several different operations like this. We're trying to pull close to about 50 to 60 officers and detectives throughout this department. As I mentioned, we're rerouting some of our specialty units to help focus our efforts on there. So their mission will change a little bit to make sure that we hit these areas.
You talk about the emphasis patrol, and you said just like 50 or 60 officers. Does SPD have the staff to be able to do this emphasis patrol to make sure these areas are safe? This
is going to be a difficult part of our staffing, and this is going to have huge challenges. And some of our detectives are getting rerouted from some of their work. So this is the reason why I wanted to make sure I announce it, because it could have some impact on certain cases. We're going to have to triage a lot of the work that we're doing to make sure that we are focused on this level of violence. And so a part of that is that I'm trying to pull every level of resource that we're going to have. We're squeezing everything out to try and make sure that we reduce this level of violence. It's unacceptable. We can't have people being shot. I had 4 people shot last night. One of them resulted in a homicide. And we've got to be able to address this issue.
How soon can the community see this task force in the works on the street?
We are actually already setting up the task force as we speak. We are having our first formal meeting as early as next week, and hope to have that by next weekend, this up and running. We'll already have certain units that will already be rerouted to have some level of emphasis in these areas, because we're already providing a lot of the gun violence emphasis just in our normal patrol operations. But actually really focusing on very targeted individuals that are pulling the trigger.
What are the plans for funding for this task force?
Right now, we're going to be operating within our existing funding. We are going to be spending some money on overtime and other things, but that is stuff that we'll work with City Council, work with the Mayor's office. But as it exists, like when you have a loss of life, we can't talk about money when it comes to that. We really have to make sure that we address the violence, and that's really what's important for us, and that's what we're committed to doing.
What units exactly would officers be pulled from to help staff this task force?
Yeah, so we're going to look at several detective units. We have our community response group that is already up, with about 20 some officers. Our traffic unit will be routed to some of the specific areas that we've focused on. Our SWAT team and some of the other specialty units that we have in our Special Operations Bureau will also be rerouted to have a focused effort in some of these areas. Every day will have a very, very specific mission. Sometimes it is also, if we're focused on making some very specific arrests of those that are being violent offenders, we're going to be using those to actually serve warrants and other things. So a lot of it's already, some of it's already existing work that they're already doing, but it's really just focused into this level of violence.
And with this 4 areas of emphasis that you just mentioned, downtown, CID, all that, is there concerns pulling officers from other areas that other parts of our city could become less safe with more emphasis in these other places?
No, so we are actually still going to maintain some of the emphasis on augmentation shifts throughout the department, throughout the city. So that's reason why we have patrol operations. They're still going to maintain those efforts. But having those very specific areas where we know the violence is upticking, and is really trying to drive that down. We know that sometimes if we hit one area, that sometimes it goes into other areas, and we're going to be able to address that area. We're going to have to make sure that we've got that flexibility to just course correct throughout the summer. We want to make sure that for the next 60 days that we actually see a reduction in the shots fired. We see that reduction in the homicides. We know that the summer months are already upticking. So just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen an increase in that. We actually saw a decrease for the last 4 months of the year last year. We saw a continued decrease in the first 5 months of this year. I mean, we were operating with close to almost under 20% in violent crime reduction. But it ain't going to matter anything to say those numbers when you talk to a family that's lost a loved one. And so that's the huge difference that we're really focused on. I mean, going up to 137th and having to have that homicide, and going up to Tuesday and having to work with a family that's lost their mother and a child, baby, pregnant. Those are the things that we have to be able to focus on, and that's what we're working on right now.
The department's already understaffed. We've seen emphasis patrols in the past. We've seen task forces in the past. How is this different? How is this not just rearranging the deck chairs?
Well, right now we're having to redeploy because we are, as you mentioned, we are short-staffed. So really refocusing our efforts on these priority 1 and shootings and violent crime, that's really what our focus is. And sometimes we're not able to get to some of the car prowls and burglaries that might be occurring. It is going to be really focused on the violence, and that is where people feel safe. And so it's rerouting some of those missions, and that's the reason why I wanted to make sure that people are aware that some things that won't necessarily, they might not be that priority just yet, because we really have to drive this crime down.
So what do you say to the residents that are the victims, whether it's of the homicides, of the gun violence, or it's the property crimes that you say are going to be less priority for the department?
We're still getting to everything, but it is we have to prioritize life. And I think that everyone can understand that is that we have to prioritize people's lives, and that's what I'm doing.
Is Seattle safe right now?
We've actually seen, as we hit this, I mentioned the kind of data, you don't really want to tell people the data, but we're still seeing a 16% decrease in violent crime. That doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of work a long road ahead. And that's the reason why I need all the partners for us to be able to pull every resource to be able to support this effort. I mean, you lose a life. I think in 26 years, you're never going to be able to, you're always going to remember those cases that are just extraordinary. The 4th of Lenora, pregnant mom literally being shot and killed, a husband that's impacted. You will always remember those cases. And that's the reason why you have to figure out how do you drive this department into making sure that we are collectively working together with all of our partners to make it safe.
The final thing, I guess, what's the ultimate solution? More officers on the streets?
Well, when it comes to staffing, I'm going to always say that I need more officers. We're working a lot of overtime because we're trying to make sure that we are covering all of our areas of the city. But honestly, I think that's a discussion for everybody. I think everybody needs resources. But for me, that will be a continuing effort. But for the next 2 months, I really need to have a focused effort on actually getting more guns off. I mean, we've covered 629 guns this year. Even being short-staffed, we're recovering more guns than we've ever had, even when we had full staffing. That's a huge concern for me. Because number one, officers are doing great work in getting guns off the streets. but that just tells you how many guns are out there. And that's the bigger problem. That's the bigger societal question. How many guns are actually out on the streets? And we've got to be able to find ways that we get those off so we can actually save lives.
Chief, on the
One more
Belltown
question.
shooting- on the
Jeremy
Belltown
Harris,
shooting-
you have the last question.
On the Belltown shooting, do you have any update on the suspect? Have you found out anything about his background? And is there any sort of law enforcement activity that could have prevented that?
You know, we know that our officers had an understanding of who he was, so experiencing some level of mental health. So we're still reviewing all aspects of that case. So I don't have really an update. We're also looking into the gun. You know, we know it was stolen out of Lakewood, and we're testing that gun to see if it was involved in any other cases. And so those are all things that are all part of the investigation that we have to do. But working with the King County Prosecutor's Office, they'll be working with their prosecutor to ensure the next steps of that case.
And just to clarify, your officers did have contact with this guy prior?
They know of the subject in the past, and so they're very well aware of some of the mental health issues that he's experienced. So, and that's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Attending, we appreciate it.
Well, you just heard from SPD's chief. The department just announced a new community violence task force. This comes on the heels of violence in the city with 2 people killed in separate shootings this week alone in Seattle. We will now